Caring for a loved one with dementia is truly one of the highest forms of philanthropy. Kathi Miracle is an author, expert, and consultant and helps caregivers navigate the challenges of dementia care with compassion, knowledge, and practical strategies. She is here to share more with us about the Silver Tsunami. Let go. Kathi Miracle, welcome to Uncommon Philanthropist.
Happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, such a delight to get to know you a little bit. And I love this discussion that we're having today to help people loving somebody with dementia just to better understand it so we can love each other better. To me, there's no greater form of philanthropy than our family, the love and care we give to them in good times and in bad. So
That's right.
so grateful to have you here. You have
Thank you.
such a knowledge in the space, and I think it's going to be a fantastic conversation. So let's start off with a little bit about you. If you can just share a little bit more about your background, Kathi.
Sure. Well, I am a native of Colorado. There's not a lot of us here. I laugh and chuckle when I meet somebody who's a native because I often don't. I am married. My husband and I actually met in 7th grade, and we went to opposite schools then and then reconnected on Facebook. And a few years ago, started dating, and we have a blended family of 4 kids and 3 grandkids. And yes. And so I love what I do. I'm very passionate about what I do. If people ask me like, what's your hobbies? I love movies. I love to travel. I love reading a good book. Those are the kind of things I like to do in my downtime.
That's great. Well, I lost my mom, Maxine, to dementia 28 years ago. And I was busy with having a family and never did anything to raise money for Alzheimer's, and found myself in launching Uncommon Philanthropist kind of talking about it again and again. So I finally figured out what I'm going to do, and I've written a children's book on her life called Maxine's Joy. So this published in late July, and all profits will be going to Alzheimer's causes. So very excited to be adding a little framework of joy around a very difficult diagnosis. And on my website, I also want to provide resources for families who are going through that. So your conversation will definitely be part of that library where we are continuing to help people navigate the difficult diagnosis of dementia.
Yeah.
So what attracted you in the first place to be working within the senior space?
My mom and dad would have said that even as a young child, I would always gravitate to older individuals, whether that was in our neighborhood, at church, in the grocery store, restaurants. And I just tended to have a very natural conversation with individuals in the elderly population. And as I got into college, I have a double bachelor's degree in speech pathology and audiology. And I really wanted to work with older individuals who were victims of stroke and had to learn how to re-talk again. And at the time, those jobs really weren't available. I was told I would really work in the elementary schools in the first few years. And however, I went to the University of Northern Colorado in Greeley, Colorado, and they just happened to have one of the top 10 gerontology programs in the nation at the time that I went through it. So I was super lucky to go through the program during the time I did. And I got my master's degree in gerontology with an emphasis in dementia and elder abuse. Counselors and professors try to help you start building your resume when you're young. So I was told, at 22, 23 years old, you should start going and, looking for jobs in that field. And really at that time, nursing homes were what I could do. And so I became a CNA in a nursing home on an Alzheimer's unit when I was very young. And I was hit and kicked and punched and scratched and thrown into a wall and ribs were broken and you name it, I did it wrong. And at the time, there was no Kathi Miracle. There was no Teepa Snow. There was no name we failed to really rely on. So I had to learn how to do it right to make sure I didn't get hurt. But then as I started growing a career in senior living in the space, I didn't want my staff to get hurt either. I started learning as much as I possibly could about various types of dementia. I learned how the brain functioned when it was normal and what happened when it got damaged. And I created several trainings and programs so that my staff and families and volunteers or whomever came into our buildings were safe along with the residents that we were taking care of.
So you have founded an organization, Silver Tsunami. If you could
Mhm.
help us understand more about that term, Silver Tsunami. Am I saying it right? Doesn't sound right.
Silver Tsunami. Yeah,
About
Silver
the term
Tsunami.
Silver Tsunami and your organization's response to that coming wave.
I actually, the very first time I ever heard the term Silver Tsunami was when I was newly out of college. I was actually a case manager for Medicaid programs in Colorado and was sent to a conference. And there was a gentleman out of a company called Age Wave in California. And he talked about the baby boomers turning 65. And he started in, I believe it was the first baby boomer turned 60, 2011. And for 18 years beyond that, we would have 10 to 15,000 people turning 65 every day. So we're not even through the baby boomers yet. We have until I think 2029 before the final baby boomer will turn 65. And so they called it this big wave of aging individuals. And so with people with, gray hair, silver hair, it was a big wave. It was a tsunami that was heading in
Mhm.
our direction. And this had to have been back in the late 90s that I heard this gentleman speak. And so he was about 10 years before his time, but he talked about how the various programs we had set up, whether it was Social Security, Medicare, whatever senior resources were out there, transportation, housing, that the United States just may not be prepared for this
Right.
tsunami that was going to hit, and that the foundation that should be put into place. So that's where I very first heard that term, was back when I was in the late 90s. The silver tsunami has always been, to refer to the baby boomers turning 65. The name kind of, just because I spent over 30 years in senior living, my husband is the one who actually came up with the name and thought this would be something that would grab people's attention. People would ask questions about it. And it was really dedicated to the population we were trying to serve and to the families who take care of those older individuals.
Well, tell us about some of the services that you offer.
For online education classes for both professionals and for families. You can buy the education modules individually or on as a bundle. I have a book coming out this fall, and it's called Your Ticket to Compassion: Navigating the Dementia Journey. And so it can be pre-purchased now at a discounted, but it'll be coming out this fall. And it's really to help people understand the dementia journey. Throughout my career, described the dementia journey as walking into an unknown amusement park. Some days the ride's fun. Some days the ride is scary. Some days you get off the ride and you're nauseous and get sick. And some days you don't want to go on the ride at all. So the entire book is themed around an amusement park to help both family and professional caregivers have better knowledge to travel this journey. We also offer trainings. I can do trainings virtually. I can do trainings on site, just depending on where somebody wants me to travel to. Sometimes I do recommend virtual trainings. That keeps the costs low for them. But I have a catalog of different training topics people can choose from, whether they want one training or they want to bundle something together. And then we work out what that looks like, or what I even will recommend. Here's the ones that get asked for most often.
Mhm.
I speak at conferences all over the United States. I've been asked to speak internationally at conferences, and I'm a nationally approved subject matter expert. So I do come in and help attorneys on legal cases when it has to do something in the aging arena.
Fantastic. Well, let's talk a little bit about dementia, and we're going to use that term because it's the
Okay.
umbrella term, correct?
Mhm. Correct.
So I think it's important for people to understand that dementia is a brain disease. So help
Mhm.
us kind of understand a little bit about when someone is diagnosed with it, what is happening with the within the brain.
Sure. So first and foremost, what I tell people is dementia itself is not the actual disease. Alzheimer's is a disease. Lewy bodies is a disease. But when
Mhm.
you look at the actual definition of dementia, they don't classify it in a disease category. It's something that happens within somebody that affects the activities of their daily living. It affects memory. It affects communication. So there's this little general kind of umbrella term for dementia. What people don't know is there's about 400 types of dementia, and the youngest person worldwide to have ever been diagnosed with a form of dementia was 2 years old in Louisiana about a year and a half ago. And so there's about 700,000 individuals worldwide that live with pediatric dementia. And even if we just looked at Alzheimer's, because you have early onset, what early onset Alzheimer's means is that somebody was diagnosed before the age of 60. And they've determined that early onset does have a genetic factor to it. But the youngest person worldwide to have been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's was 19 years old in China. So oftentimes people believe that having a diagnosis of any form of dementia is only like an old people's challenge, and it really isn't. There are so many younger people, and there are different forms of dementia that can hit people at younger ages. So what happens in the brain is different for each different type of dementia. So like with Alzheimer's, Alzheimer's is the most common form, makes up 60 to 80% of diagnoses around the world. Alzheimer's actually starts in the hippocampus, which is our memory center, which is located in the temporal lobe of the brain, and it travels from there. Where frontal temporal dementia really is what it says. It hits the front part of the brain and it hits the temporal. Our front part of the brain is where our executive functioning skills are. So that affects planning, decision making, judgment, and organization. And so typically, we know now, science has told us, we know now that we can identify changes in an individual's brain up to 20 years prior to a diagnosis. And so the individual typically starts seeing things long before there's ever a diagnosis. What we also know, though, is that we can protect and maintain cognitive health so that individuals could avoid a dementia diagnosis, in some circumstances, delay the progression of it. And in some cases, we've been able to reverse cognitive decline. So there's a lot that the brain can do. The science and doctors I listen to say the brain is our last frontier.
Well, that's encouraging news for sure. So let's talk about prevention and what we can do to maintain our brain health. Do you have some tips for us
Yes,
for keeping our brain
I
healthy?
mean, that is actually becoming one of my more popular trainings that I get requested to do, which I find interesting. Dementia is actually the second most feared diagnosis in the world. Cancer of any kind is the first. So when we know that, and we know that we can identify changes up to 20 years prior, then knowing the steps that one can take from a preventative measure is super important. So there are 6 things that I talk about, and they do them consistently. This research has said about 60% of people could avoid a dementia diagnosis altogether. The first one is nutrition. We now know what's good for the heart is good for the brain. So staying on a heart-healthy diet, a Mediterranean diet, a DASH diet, a keto diet. The research shows that keto is probably the best for brain health, although the Mediterranean is rich in omega-3s. And so the healthy fats are what we want to be consuming. So staying on a diet like that on a consistent basis is the focus. I tell people you want to try to eliminate or minimize processed sugars. White processed sugar is one of the worst things that we can do for the brain. It clogs it up and it makes kind of a sticky substance on the brain. And that's hard to wash away, especially if we're consuming it on a daily basis. So the people who drink, a Coke or a Pepsi 2 or 3 times a day, and they do it 7 days a week, I always tell people, I'm not telling you have to give up the Pepsi. Just don't do it every day, just maybe once or twice a week. Hydration is the next step. And hydration is super important. Water for our body, it helps cushion our major organs. It helps with brain functioning. It helps the brain deliver messages. We want to drink at least 64 ounces of water a day, and we do not want to drink more than half our body weight. So if somebody weighs 200 pounds, they don't want to drink more than 100 ounces of water. If you drink too much water, it actually will flush important nutrients, vitamins, and minerals from our system, and then we end up with other complications. So there's definitely a balance in there. I mean, I'm a good example of someone who never drank water. So I encourage people, if that's who you are, then start off with just flavoring the water just a little bit. There's lots of products out there that you can do it in a healthy way where it might taste like weak Kool-Aid, but you're going to start consuming a lot more water. And there's a lot of apps out there that can track your water consumption, but hydration is super important for brain health. The next thing is sleep. We know now that sleep deprivation actually causes the brain to shrink, and somebody who is sleep deprived is almost more dangerous on the road than somebody who is intoxicated because their response time is slow, their decision making isn't the same. And so one of the challenges for people who work overnight shifts, if they've done that on a regular basis, they don't get into the same kind of deep sleep that those of us who don't work those kind of jobs. So for people who work overnight shifts, that's an even more important focus as to what kind of sleep are you getting and what is it quality. It's not the quantity of sleep we get, it is the quality of sleep that we get. We know that if someone's getting an average of 8 hours of sleep a night, they're probably getting the type of quality sleep that they need. Apple Watch can track your sleep patterns. There's other devices out there. So you want to be into a deep sleep and you want to be into having a quality sleep. When the brain goes into that type of quality sleep, it actually kind of goes through what I refer to as a car wash. And the body fluids go in and it flushes the brains of all the buildup that's happened during the day and the toxins that we breathe in. When you don't go into a deep sleep, the brain doesn't have the opportunity to go through that car wash. And so your buildup builds up time over time and it'll continue to build up and it's harder for the brain to wash that away. So sleep is really important. Getting oxygenated blood to the brain, you can do that through several different entities. Anything cardio is really easy. So walking, running, water aerobics, bicycling, those are all cardio things. You can even do things like yoga, Pilates, strength training. Those also help get oxygenated blood to the brain as well. I also encourage people to do deep breathing exercises. As
Mhm.
human beings, we typically only use the top third of our lungs. So when people do start that exercise, it's uncomfortable and it can be a little painful because they're not used to using the bottom two-thirds of the lungs. So I encourage those people to do that and to get up to maybe 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes in the evening. Do it right before you get out of bed. Do it right when you go to bed. So you're already in a laying down position, but you're kind of pushing oxygen aided blood to the brain. Research also shows when we do these spurts of energy. So I often will run into people who say, well, I don't have time to go to the gym or I don't have time to run. So I kind of start with teaching them to take 2, 3, 5 minutes at a time and just walk in place as fast as they can. In 5 minutes, I can get my heart rate up to anywhere between 110 and 115 beats a minute, which is, my resting heart rate's about 60. So that's a pretty good jump in
Mhm.
doing that. And when you get those spurts of energy like that or those spurts of exercises, it pushes oxygenated blood faster into the brain. And so I usually can find in people's schedule a few 2 to 5 minutes throughout the day that they can do those bursts of energy. So they're not committing to going for a half-hour walk if they don't think they have time for that. Socialization is key also. When we are putting ourselves in social settings, we are having to exercise the brain on so many different levels. We're having to use auditory processing, auditory memory, short term memory, possibly visual processing, visual memory. We have to use all types of attention, which is sustained attention, divided attention, selective attention. We have to use logic and reasoning if they're asking us questions about things. So we're using so many cognitive skills when we're in social settings. The challenge becomes as soon as somebody maybe gets a diagnosis, they don't feel like they can keep up in a conversation. So they end up doing the opposite and start isolating themselves, which almost does the reverse. It starts helping people decline faster versus keeping them in a social setting, forcing kind of the brain to exercise in those settings. It doesn't have to mean you have to be there for 30 minutes. Maybe you start at 10 minutes, 15 and build from there. But socialization is a key component and it's one of the very first things people take away or take off the table. If they feel they're having cognitive challenges or they have actually gotten a diagnosis. There's a lot of debate over the sixth one, which is termed either cognitive therapy, cognitive exercising, brain training. I see doctors, psychologists all the time saying, don't waste your money on gaming apps. I see gaming apps saying, do this for 15 minutes, you'll have a great memory. What I will tell you is what the research tells us and is scientifically proven is that if we spend 20 to 30 minutes exercising our brain through cognitive exercises, we can actually strengthen cognitive skills. Here's where it becomes really problematic in this sixth step is that I have people who will show me their phones or their tablets or their iPads and say, oh, I play Sudoku or, oh, I play crossword puzzles or I do this. Am I exercising my brain? And my response is usually yes and no, because what happens is we gravitate to the games that we enjoy. So what you're doing is a couple things. One, if you walked into a gym and all you did was bicep curls and walked out, are you exercising your body? Well, yes and no. You're exercising your biceps. So
Mhm.
if you're playing Sudoku or you're playing crossword puzzles, you're exercising a part of the brain. You're not exercising the entire brain, which the goal should always be to exercise the entire brain in a 7-day period of time. The other thing is we gravitate to the things that we enjoy. And so what you're doing is you're exercising the strong part of your brain. You're not exercising the weak part of your brain. So what happens is the strong starts compensating for the weak, and the strong gets stronger and the weak gets weaker. And then we end up with cognitive challenges. And then people say, well, those cognitive exercising doesn't work. It does work. You just have to be able to have had an evaluation or some kind of an assessment of the brain to understand what are the strong areas of the brain, what are the weak areas, and then focus on strengthening the weak areas of the brain. But when individuals can implement, I call it a lifestyle program, and they can do those 6 things consistently, our research has shown that about 60% of people could avoid a dementia diagnosis altogether.
It's just tremendous. And then I guess within number 6 is reading, playing music, that type of activity. Is that included in that
Those are all cognitive exercises. So
number 6?
reading is a cognitive exercise. Reading is actually an auditory processing exercise before it's a visual processing exercise. Music, if people really wanted to, time management, if you are reading lyrics to music, so like karaoke, like if you were actually reading the lyrics, you were singing out loud and you were moving a body part, like you were waving, a scarf or you were marching in place, is the only exercise that will exercise every single part of the brain at one time, including forcing the left and right side of the brains to communicate with one another. So when I worked in senior living, that was
Interesting.
one of the things we
Mhm.
used to do. We would do it 2 or 3 times a week and have sing-alongs with residents, and we'd give them scarves to wave and we'd put the words up on a big screen. And so doing that 20 to 30 minutes 2 to 3 times a week is the one single exercise somebody could do to exercise every part of the brain at the same time.
You can buy those scarves off of Amazon. They're really
Yes,
cheap,
you
and
can.
they're really fun to wing around. That was fantastic. I have a history of Alzheimer's in my family. I mentioned losing my mom and my sister, so
Mm.
anything we can do to protect our brain health, I think we all need to be working on that. And the sleep thing, that's such a struggle for a lot of people as you get older. It's like, you just maintaining good sleep is just difficult. So and then you're like, I
It's
gotta be sleeping. And
yeah,
then you can't sleep.
it's very difficult. I was told, I've never seen a study on this, so please know that I was told by a nutritionist, and also by a friend of mine in the medical field, that taking calcium at night actually puts somebody into a deeper sleep. So I think long ago, like, my grandmother would give my mom a glass of warm milk to go to sleep. And so if you have something,
Mm.
even if you take a calcium supplement, it is one of the supplements I probably promote, is that calcium should help in a very natural way put you into a deeper sleep than what you may have gotten
Mm.
without it.
Great tip. Okay, so let's talk about you suspect a loved one, they're having short-term memory issues, you're seeing some troubling signs. As a loved one, how should you best respond? What do you need to be looking for? And at what point do you say we need to get to the doctor?
It's probably one of the hardest stages in this journey because, one, people don't want this diagnosis, and two, it's very easy for families to excuse what they're seeing away. We all lead very busy lives. We're all pulled in so many directions, especially if we're caring for an aging parent, working a job, and raising children. And so we just tend to get pulled in so many directions. So when we take a moment and we think, well, gosh, that's the third time mom's asked that question, or wait a minute, dad looks a little disheveled. He doesn't normally look like this. And we ask questions. Usually what the other person will say is, oh, I didn't get a good night's sleep, or oh, I just didn't eat as much as I should have today, or. And as individuals, because sometimes we experience that ourselves, we go, oh yeah, I know how that feels. And they let it go instead of trying, like, let me ask more questions and dive deep. Cognitive abilities is a very sensitive topic. I have had to approach that conversation with families. I'll use my own family members. When we were starting to notice my mom having a more of a disorganized note system. She was administrative secretary for years, and so she was always very organized. And so we all kind of started seeing some things,
Mhm.
and so I had to approach her and just say, here are the things I'm seeing that seem out of normal. And she had her excuses. And I mean, for me, it's a little different because I'm like, well, this is what I do for a living, and this is why I'm concerned. I will go with you to the doctor, but I do think that we should at least get a baseline of where you're at. So I tried to stay away from things like, let's see if you have memory issues, or let's see if there's a dementia diagnosis, because those can be very scary for individuals.
Right.
They somehow put themselves at the end of the disease process and they think, I'm not going to remember anyone's name. Someone's going to put me in a nursing home. My family
Mhm.
won't come see me. I mean, all of a sudden they create this entire life that isn't even happening at this point in time. And so when we start noticing things, and what I would tell families is just take a step back and observe it for a couple of months, not,
Mhm.
it doesn't have to be like the first time you see it, because maybe they did get a good bad night's sleep. Maybe they are a little dehydrated. Maybe they are
Mhm.
malnourished. Even new medications that are combating with each other, contradiction in pharmaceuticals can cause challenges. So
Mhm.
there are a lot of things that can present like dementia, but once they're fixed, then that goes away. And so I would typically tell a family, well, what are you observing? How often have you seen this? What time of day is this happening? I would ask a lot of questions. The key things that become concerning is if, like, they come home and they've laid their keys down and they can't retrace their steps to find them, or they find the car keys in the cereal box or in a place that it wouldn't normally be placed. That's when things get a little more concerning. Unfortunately, for a lot of families, they end up getting what I call the crisis phone call, where mom or dad was just going to the grocery store and ended up on the other side of town or ended up in another state. Those are the crisis phone calls. And at that point, it's when I'm like, I know this is going to be a tough conversation, but this is really a huge red flag or an indicator that something more is going on. And how long has it been going on? This just didn't happen today when they woke up. There have been other things, if you piece them together, that has been building up to this moment. So now they might be unsafe. And if they're in a car, they might be unsafe on the road and cause being a safety issue for others. Or, you know, if they leave the stove on, the house burns down. And then what does that do? So I don't ever want to try and panic or scare somebody, but the reality of it is that by the time you get that crisis phone call, this is not the beginning of this. You're already well into the dementia journey, and now it's how can we keep everybody safe? And so
Mhm.
definitely start with your primary physician. I'm a big advocate of going to see a neurologist that specializes in dementia. There are a lot of neurologists that do a great job, but some will only specialize like in multiple sclerosis, or somebody specializes in migraines. Want to seek out a neurologist that actually specializes in
Mhm.
either the aging population or in dementia.
That's very good to know. I've heard several stories of people who go to the primary care physician. Primary care physician will say, well, we suspect it may be dementia, and they'll provide a pamphlet, and the family's just kind of left to figure it out. So I'm so glad there's people like you to provide a helping hand along the way, because I think it can quickly become very overwhelming. And you're right, it's human nature just to kind of go to that worst case scenario. And for a lot of people, it's a long journey.
For a lot of people, it is. It depends on the type of dementia somebody has. If somebody has Alzheimer's or vascular dementia is where someone may have had a lot of strokes, or
Oh,
they're not getting the proper amount of oxygenated blood to the brain, and so it causes damage. From the time someone's diagnosed to the time they pass away, it could be 8 to 20 years. I mean, that is a long, long journey, and it can be
mhm,
very exhausting. Where somebody who is diagnosed with Creutzfeldt-Jakob, that is, in simple terms, like mad cow's disease. And from the time somebody's diagnosed to the time they pass away is usually 6 months or less. Only about 10% of individuals live longer than 2 years with that type of dementia. So I'm always interested in knowing if someone can tell me, the type of dementia. That's very difficult to do without an autopsy. A lot of doctors will do a diagnosis of elimination. So I've learned to ask a lot of other questions just because, not that I've seen it all, I've just seen a lot in working in 30 years in senior living and specializing in dementia care. And so I typically can kind of say, I think this is probably what, because they each have their own markers, like Lewy bodies. We know Lewy bodies, people get hallucinations, both visual and auditory hallucinations. Not that you can't get that in other dementias, but they're more prominent in a
mhm.
Lewy body dementia individual. So there are definitely key markers I think we can look for to help to try to determine what type of dementia we might be dealing with. It's very difficult, however, without an actual autopsy.
So You get the diagnosis of your loved one. What should you do first? What is the greatest priority?
The greatest priority is legal paperwork because the person has to still be able to sign legal documents. And I've seen families who put this off because somebody doesn't want to give away their decision making rights. And I completely understand that. But if you get too far down the road and they are no longer able to sign a legal document, then you have to go through the courts for conservatorship and guardianship. And it's timely and it's costly. In Colorado, I'm sure it's like this in other states, but at least in Colorado, the only professional who can deem somebody incompetent is a judge in a court of law. A doctor can weigh in and certainly provide an opinion. I mean, I could weigh in and provide an opinion, but to actually take away the decision-making rights, a judge has to declare the person incompetent. So that's where they go through the courts to get a guardianship and conservatorship, and they're the gold standard. I mean, they're the top notch. You're not going to break these, but they are very time consuming and costly, and it just is exhausting to go through the process. So as soon as somebody gets a diagnosis, my very first piece of advice to them is you need to find an elder law attorney or someone who can put your legal documents together, your final wishes. Do you want to be an organ donor? Do you not? I mean, there's a lot of questions that families don't always have those conversations first. And so that is always the first priority, I believe, is to get your legal decisions, legal paperwork in order while the person is still capable of signing legal documents. That by far is the first step. Beyond that is, I always like to tell people, have your houses assessed, because if you're not living in a ranch style home and you have stairs and there's so many things in the home environment that can add complications to taking care with somebody with dementia. So you want to make your home a dementia friendly environment. And by doing so, I believe people could probably keep people at home longer than what they actually do today. And you have to have a resource binder and who is going to be your support network. I mean, those are really important things to get set up sooner rather than later in this journey.
Great, great advice. So I know there's a lot of do's and don'ts. So I'll let you pick. Do you want to do do's or don'ts as caregivers, and loving someone with dementia? What should we do
Mhm.
and what should we not do or say?
So, do's and don'ts sort of go hand in hand when I talk about this particular topic. I tell people, don't say, do you remember? They probably don't. And so that can be a trigger. What we know and what I've found throughout my career is 80% of the behaviors that people with dementia have are actually due to the person interacting with them. They're either communicating too fast, they're
Interesting.
communicating too much. It's the wrong approach. They're approaching from the wrong direction. They're approaching too fast. They're getting into somebody's personal space. It's could be due to environment. Their person is understimulated. They're overstimulated. It could be due to an untreated medical need. Maybe they're taking an as-needed pain med and it needs to be scheduled, or they're taking it every 8 hours. It needs to be every 4 hours, or it's a 200 milligram. It needs to be a 400 milligram. So 80% of what happens is within our control. And so when I talk to families about the do's and don'ts, I'm like, don't ever approach from behind. You're going to startle somebody. Their visual path is now about 45 degrees in either angle. As the dementia continues, that narrows, and even straight in front of them can become complicated. So you have a little window here and a little window here. But your best approach is usually very slow. And from the front and from about a 45-degree angle. Don't get in somebody's personal space. Our personal space as human beings is usually a 3-foot bubble. And when people we don't know or we're not comfortable with gets in our personal space, we will step back, and then if they do it again, we'll step back. If they continue, we might tell them, please keep your distance. This is not comfortable. For somebody with dementia, their personal space can be up to 6 feet. So you're 3 feet and they're 3 feet. If you get into their personal space, they don't tend to back up. They just start defending it. And so that's when people can get hit. Caregivers can easily get hit if they're getting into someone's personal space. And I watch it all the time. I see family caregivers do it. I see professional caregivers do it. Especially if, like, as a professional caregiver, if this person has been living here for 6 months or a year, I know who they are. You may, but to them, you might be a new face every single day. So getting in their personal space without permission, you can actually get hit. You can get injured. You could throw them off balance. They could fall. So while it seems silly, I always used to extend my hand, and and usually when you extend your hand, the other person will too. I do a quick pump of the hand, like I'll pump it. This is our most sensitive part of our body is around our mouth, and our second most sensitive part of the body is our palm of our hand. So
Mhm.
when we're pumping somebody's hand, they'll actually look at you. And I used to just say, "Hi, I'm Kathy." And I would say it slow enough, but then as they were started to smile, I sort of had permission to get a little bit closer. So while
Mhm.
it feels silly for me as the person who's cognitively alert to do that all the time, it also I'm being respectful of the individual with dementia. Um, Other do's and don'ts is I'm not a fan of alarms on doors. I always paint the picture. If you've ever seen the movie of Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise, at the end of that movie, Tom Cruise wakes up to, Dustin Hoffman's trying to cook pancakes or waffles, and there's a bunch of smoke, and the smoke alarm's going off. And he doesn't even know where that alarm's coming from. He's just banging on the door to try to get out, and the door has a chain on it, and this door is just going bam, 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 bam. It's kind of the same thing. When an alarm goes off, the person with dementia has no idea where that's coming from, whether it's a bed alarm, a chair alarm, a door alarm, and it can actually trigger a very bad behavior, a bad reaction from them. So those alarms are typically used for the caregiver so they know what's going on. For somebody who is wanting to go outside, if you put a 4 foot by 6 foot black mat in front of the door, at some point they come up to the edge of it, but they don't cross it because they think it's a hole and they can't
Mhm.
reach the door to go out of it. So more often than not, they'll just turn around and go back the other way. No alarms. Everybody stays safe, but
Mhm.
there's a way to make your home safe in caring for dementia with tricks like that. And then there's ways to make sure that you're not triggering behaviors either. There's a lot of debate over whether white lies for somebody will work with people with dementia. I'm a big advocate that you don't lie to somebody unless it's absolutely necessary, because as long as I've done this, unless I'm really focusing on an individual, I couldn't tell you if they were cognitively confused or cognitively alert. And if you lie to somebody while they are cognitively alert, they will remember. I mean, they may not understand what it is about you that they don't like, but when you come around, it doesn't feel comfortable or safe, and the hair on the back of their neck goes up. And there's going to be a lot of difficulty trying to get that person undressed or dressed or into a shower, and they get really combative because you're asking them to be in one of the most vulnerable positions that you can, and they don't trust you. There's a reason why they don't trust you. So I always tell families there are techniques to use. And I've said, people said, "Well, have you ever lied?" I have. I've lied to an individual. It was the last resort to try to get them to calm down or redirect them, but it certainly wasn't the first go-to. And so there are a lot of other techniques that can be used in order to de-escalate a situation, redirect an individual
Mhm.
without having to lie to them. Those are some big ones that I get asked about a
Yeah.
lot.
When I know a common phrase is "I wanna go home."
Mhm, mhm.
So, what does that usually mean?
When someone says, "I wanna go home," they're usually talking about the home they grew up in or the home they raised their children in. It's one
Mm.
of the 2. And so I always tell people, talk about the topic. So I can get almost anyone around to food in about 8 to 10 questions. And so if someone said to me, "I wanna go home," I go, "Well, where is home? I don't know where you live. So tell me about home. Do you live on a farm? Do you live in the city?" "Well, we live on a farm." "Okay. Do you live in a big house, a small house? Is it 2-story? Is it a ranch? What color is it? Do you have a big barn? What kind of animals do you have? What's your favorite holiday at your home?" Usually Christmas was a big one. "How did your mom and dad decorate for Christmas? Did you get to put the star on top of the tree? Did you decorate outside of your house? Did you get a lot of snow when you were growing up? Did your mom have fresh baked chocolate chip cookies and milk or hot cocoa? Can you taste those melted chocolate
Mhm.
chips?" And you can kind of start seeing people start salivating and they're like, "Oh, I'm hungry. I'm getting hungry. Are you getting hungry? Let's go find some food." So you
Mm.
talk about the topic long enough and you can sort of navigate yourself around to, how did mom cook dinner? What was your favorite snack after school? You can usually gravitate the conversation around and then talk as much about that food as
Oh.
possible. And all of a sudden, if you do it long enough, people will start salivating because they can remember what that tastes like. And you're
Yeah.
like, "I'm getting hungry. Let's go find some of snack."
That's so good, and a lot of times that long-term memory, they're actually recalling.
Yeah, so it calms them
That's
down
hilarious.
too. It helps calm people down when they're able to reminisce about something that was a favorite holiday, a favorite activity, a favorite memory. You're able to start helping them calm down at the same time because the long-term memory is intact. The other thing, and most people, they don't get trained on this, but the brain is not capable of processing emotion and logic at the same time. It's going to pick one or the other.
Mm.
If somebody is wanting to go home and they're getting themselves agitated or frustrated or getting anxious about it, when you start asking questions and they're thinking logically about the answers and you're tapping into the long-term memory about favorite memories and favorite hobbies and favorite things, all of a sudden you're able to squash the emotion and help keep them calmer because you're focused on doing something logical with them. And then, of course, at the same time, from the time we're born till the time we die, every time we experience any kind of emotion, whether that's happy, sad, angry, frustrated, overwhelmed, anxious, the brain actually releases a chemical. And what that chemical craves is something salty, sweet, or fatty. So if you know the person's comfort foods, and I could be in a room of 100 people and ask them their favorite comfort food, most people, if not all people's comfort foods, will land in one of those three categories. So as you're walking with an individual, you're talking about home, you're talking about something, get a snack that lands in one of those three categories. And that actually starts satisfying the craving in the brain, and it also starts calming them down.
Well, and I know as a caregiver or a loved one, you have those moments when they can't remember your name. So sad. Do you
Mhm.
have any tips for caregivers for kind of be able to ease that?
Well, I still tell caregivers, I know you might be, the daughter, the son, or even spouses, but when you first interact with that person, a lot of times we can see the confused look on their face. And so I always encourage them to go in and say, hi, mom, it's Kathy. And for me and my sisters, we look a lot alike. My dad, near the end of his life, was getting dementia. And although he still kind of sort of knew who we all were, my mom has confused us at times when she's really groggy or really sort of out of it. And so I've always encouraged people to, I know it sounds silly. I know that you're their child. However, when you first walk in, if you just say, hi, mom, hi, dad, it's Kathy, I'm here to visit, then you quickly help them orient and you preserve and protect their dignity and their respect by not having them try to, like, well, mom, don't you know who I am? Clearly she doesn't. And all that does is cause frustration for her, frustration for the caregiver. It causes hurt. It causes so many other emotions. So it's just easier to ward all of that off in the beginning by when you come in. And you may feel silly about it, but you'll spend how many seconds introducing yourself versus how many minutes to hours not going down that road. And so it's always very frustrating. As I couldn't even imagine as a child that my mom or dad didn't know who I was, but I know that happens. I see kids, I see families all the time where they think the child is their sister or they think the son is their spouse. I mean, and I just sort of have to tell them, just say, oh, no, mom, it's not. Dad, it's not George, it's your son, Bill. And that will feel awkward in the beginning. But when you can help orient her quickly, it is less awkward than continuing down that path in conversation for an hour or 2 hours.
Good. So, do you know of any organizations that specifically serve the caregiver community?
I think there's a lot of organizations that out there that do that. I mean, we certainly strive to, at Silver Tsunami, we certainly strive to help support and protect the caregiver, and whether there's a family caregiver, the professional caregiver, the Alzheimer's Association, the Alzheimer's Foundation, their Dementia Friendly Society. There are so many organizations that really do try to focus on and help the family caregiver. I think there's more focus on the family caregiver than the professional caregiver, quite honestly. I mean, there's a lot of great companies who provide training to professional caregivers. I've seen a lot of them. And so there's a solid attempt to do it if the company is willing to invest the time to do it, whether it's face to face or online. It could be difficult to find sometimes, but most of these organizations will offer support groups. It's part of when families, I tell them, when you first hear about a dementia diagnosis, find out who your resources are. Who your resources are in a metropolitan area is going to really be different than those in a rural community. Although what I do see in rural communities is that church-going individuals, friends, neighbors are much more quickly ready to step up and help and support than people in metropolitan areas. In metropolitan, there are people who live in neighborhoods and they don't even know their next door neighbor. They don't even talk to the people across the street because everybody's so busy. So there's blessing and curses to wherever you live, but wherever you do live, finding out who your resources are, who you might be able to bring into the home to provide respite time. I see families who try to do that after the person is really confused and then the person doesn't want to introduce a new person into their world. So if you're going to start building those relationships, build them while the person is still cognitively alert, because having those services come in later is going to be a lot easier for you and the person won't fight you as much. And I hear people say, well, it costs money. I know it costs money. Have somebody see if an organization will come in for an hour, once a week to go for a walk with this person. But the sooner you can start building those networks and those ties and those relationships with the person with the dementia and for the caregiver, the better that person is going to travel that journey as they go along. When they implement those services later, it's a lot more difficult, and it can actually be a lot more costly too to do that. And then there's less of a chance that it will be successful.
Been reading about, and I'm not gonna get the terminology correct, but these connection cafes that are
Yeah.
popping up, is that the proper term?
Everybody calls it a little bit different, but that's the same kind of philosophy of them. And I've seen those done both virtually and I've seen them in person. I've seen a hybrid. I think that anything that someone can involve themselves in, because support, you want to be with people who are walking through your shoes, because when you're in the midst of it, it's very hard to think creatively as to how to solve a challenge or solve a problem. You can get on Facebook. There's so much social media support groups out there now. The thing that I caution anybody on is be careful not to get sucked into the negativity. It's very easy. This is not an easy journey. So going to a support group, whoever the moderator is or whoever's running it, they need to be able to do it in a way that people walk away from the meeting with beneficial information. Not everybody just sort of, threw up on each other. So I always, when people are running these types of groups, I always say, start with what was a win this last week for you. And maybe it was my husband got up and dressed himself this morning, but he got up and did it by himself. So what was the win this week? When people can understand how to celebrate those small wins, and they focus on the celebrations. Again, I'm going to go back to the brain. The brain actually releases a chemical, the feel-good chemical, and then it helps us stay motivated and keep going to the next section of a meeting. And it's like, well, what are you frustrated about, or what do we want to talk about, or what's something that somebody needs help with? It's not as grandiose or it's not as frustrating because we've released a good feel chemical first, and then we're walking into this portion, and the information that's exchanged is done so in a much more supportive way than people just kind of, putting all the negativity into the middle. And then I always say, so, okay, what is one goal you want to try to shoot for this next week? I have a to-do thing. And it doesn't matter what they say. A win is a win in whoever's world. Don't ever criticize somebody's win, because that could be huge for them. That's their light at the end of the tunnel. So when we start with something positive and we end with something positive, and in the middle, we're able to really delve into what is somebody struggling with, or the challenge, or what do they need, we end up having a very productive type of supportive meeting for individuals who are involved. And that's really how meetings like that should be run.
I love that so much, and I know that negativity is so contagious. So when you walk in and you're having a hard day, your loved one can feel that, and then they catch it. And one of the questions I had was, how can we keep joy alive when we're caring for a loved one with dementia?
Love that question. There is a book, a lady who is actually an activity director. It's all about memorable moments. You hear people call it silver linings. I refer to it as memorable moments. Other people refer to them other ways. But when I would train staff, professional staff, and when I try to teach family caregivers, is my very first question is, tell me or describe for me when you had a perfect day. You woke up till the minute you went to bed, nothing went wrong. The weather was great, like nothing went wrong. You got to the doctor's office, they were on time. Nothing went wrong in that one day. Tell me when that was. No one can ever tell me when they've had a perfect day, because it doesn't exist,
Oh,
right? Something always happens in our world,
yeah.
right? Perfect day doesn't exist. Well, if a perfect day doesn't exist, then why do we try so hard to create a perfect day for our loved one with dementia? That doesn't exist for them either. But what we can create is we can create these small, very memorable moments. And those are small moments where, they get a twinkle in their eye, or they get a smile on their face, or they have that moment of being cognitively alert, and you get to enjoy that for 30 seconds or the minute that it lasted. And I think that when people can focus on how many memorable moments, or how many memorable moments did I create for that person, and focus on those, There's a lot more probably in the beginning of the dementia journey, and it starts getting smaller the middle. But even at the end, even when someone is in their last few hours, I've watched them smile. I've watched them react to a hand massage. We did a lot of stuff with aromatherapy in the buildings that I ran and what I train and teach on, brushing their hair, reading them a passage from the Bible. There's so many things that we can find memorable moments and enjoy and savor those up until somebody takes a final breath. And that's what I tell people to focus on is those special little moments that make us giggle or laugh or we remember, have a favorite memory. They happen all the time. I just don't know that they happen frequently enough that people focus on them.
So beautiful. And get the kids involved. Let them know that your loved one is still there and we are going to love on them until they're not here anymore.
Absolutely. Kids,
Don't be
this is
scared.
so convenient.
I think we just have to be the bridge all the time.
We have to be the bridge all the time. I was 37 years old when I first started running my very first senior living building. And my daughter was 2 years old at the time, and she would come with me. She was introduced to that world at a very young age. So as she got older, she would actually want her friends to come with her to come volunteer. Like they wanted
Aw,
to come read to people. They wanted to come paint nails. They wanted to whatever it was, come talk. I mean, sometimes I'd say, well, here, pull a topic out of the hat and go find George and talk to him about his military experience. And so the more we could introduce kids into this environment, and so my buildings, we partnered with daycare programs, we partnered with schools of all ages, elementary, high
oh,
school, middle
so cool.
school. We actually, in one town, we partnered with the colleges and the sorority and the fraternities would come in once a quarter and have dances with our residents. And
Oh,
it was part of their philanthropy of what they did. And so there are so many ways to introduce kids into the environment. And when it's our own parents or someone's grandparents, helping that child better understand what is happening, but also kind of the do's and the don'ts too, because little kids don't understand that they may have been the one that triggered the behavior and they don't understand why grandma or grandpa are yelling at them or being nasty to them. And the image they walk away with is a negative one. And so if we can teach kids at a young age, this is the best thing to do when interacting with grandma or grandpa or whomever, they learn a very healthy way to connect with people, especially people with dementia.
so good. Okay, Kathy, so you mentioned your book. Tell us the name of your book again, and then tell us a little bit about RX brain training centers.
Learning RX. Okay, sure.
Learning RX.
So I'll talk about the book first. The book is Your Ticket to Compassion: Navigating the Dementia Journey. It's a book that's entirely themed around an amusement park, and so we talk about the tilt-a-whirl or the Ferris wheel. Those will really align with the repetitive questions or the behaviors, or how to say the long goodbye. We even have a chapter called The Concession Stand, and we talk about eating habits. So it's 16 chapters long. It will be released at the end of October or up to mid-November. And so it's really a book about how to help people travel this journey and things they may not have thought of. The first chapter is even almost like, here's a checklist that you should have, or if your loved one has to go to an emergency room, here's the form you should use so emergency personnel know how to interact with them appropriately. So we want to provide resources and tools for individuals so that they're not having to spend a lot of time researching this on their own. But it's given me a different way to have a voice and to help people in a different way. And I love that it's coming out it'll be in an Audible book. It'll be in a hard copy or a paperback book. But it's information people will be able to refer back to. It's hard when they hear me speak at a conference. They take as many notes as they possibly can, but then they go back to their notes sometimes. They're like, well, I know this was something really important because it's what I've done. So when I've sat at conferences. So I'm really excited for the book to come out. We will be traveling in different cities for book signing opportunities. And so if we come to a city near you, would love to meet you, get an autograph book, just love the stories and the people I get to meet through this because everybody has their own story. And so I'm really excited about the book. Learning RX is a brain training center. So Learning RX is actually another business I own. Their world headquarters are in Colorado Springs, Colorado. So I'm a hot stone's throw from them in Denver. They are actually in 43 different countries, and they are the number one one-on-one brain training company in the world. So what they do, it is a company that if you don't have a Learning RX near you, you can call the corporate office and they will connect you with one of the national centers. And so they start off with a brain skill assessment. So that's where we do identify the strengths and weaknesses of cognitive skills in the brain. And then they customize a program to help strengthen cognitive skills for an individual. My youngest student personally has been 6 years old. My oldest student just graduated at 82. And so we jokingly say any brain at any age. I got into Learning RX. I purchased a franchise because everything they do is scientifically backed. And so to understand and know how to strengthen cognitive skills at a much early age is a huge component of protecting and maintaining cognitive health. So when you can go in and you can change somebody's life, someone who's had a traumatic brain injury gets their life back because the brain is creating new neural pathways and we're strengthening those pathways. Somebody who's had a stroke can walk and talk again. Somebody who is struggling in school is able to go from D's and F's to A's and B's because we're strengthening the core cognitive skills needed to learn easier and think faster and have a better memory.
That is a cool concept.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be a part of all of that.
Well, I could sit here and chat with you all day. So I close out these conversations with my tagline, and that is let go. Kathy, give me a rousing let go. And then
Let
just
go.
kind of let go. And then kind of frame it, close out our conversation about empowering caregivers and um,
Mm.
taking back our joy in this whole process.
So here's what I'll say is let go of the guilt, of the pain, of the frustration, of the emotional part of all of this. It's not that you don't have the right to have a whoosh and not have your meltdowns because this is a very, very hard journey. But know that you shouldn't have to walk this journey alone. There are so many support systems out there. And when I talk about let going of the guilt, make sure you're taking care of yourself first as a caregiver. Because if you don't take care of yourself first, you will burn out and you won't be there to take care of the people who really need you.
So good. So, how can people get a hold of you?
So you can get to our website through mysilvertsunami.com. And that is one of the best ways. If you were wanting to get in touch with me personally, you can fill out a contact form. We do offer a free consultation, a 1 hour free consultation for families who just need some questions answered. And depending on what the questions are, we can align them with one of the team members on the team. More often than not, we book a time with me to get an hour time with me. And so that's the best way to get a hold of us. We are just launching a monthly newsletter. And so if you want to be a part of it, it's going to be lots of tips and tricks at every time of the year and information for both the family caregiver and the professional caregiver.
Thank you so much for your time and for what you do in serving our loved ones and their families with dementia. Just really keep up the great work, Kathy. It was great
Well, it
talking
was
to you.
such a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's been wonderful. Let go.